Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Ted Gardner, and I'm an interviewer for the Library of Congress Oral History Project, which is so capably handled here in our public library by Dennis Daly of our History Department, a master's degree in history from the University of Cincinnati, and a very capable videographer. And we're talking today to Mr. David Campbell. And of course, in Cincinnati, that's a very famous name, as you well know. Where were you born, David?
I was born in Orangeville, Pennsylvania, and before we go too far, I have to correct, it's Campbell, as in
Campbell. I'm sorry.
Campbell soup.
Yeah, well, that's a famous name, too.
That's a famous name, too.
Thank you for correcting me there.
Sorry.
I looked and I thought, oh boy. All right. Now, where in Pennsylvania is Orangeville?
I was in Orangeville, Pennsylvania, and it's a very small town. At that time, probably 200 people.
My goodness.
Not 30 miles from Wilkes-Barre.
Oh, okay.
30 miles from Hazleton.
Okay.
Near the Susquehanna River.
Sure. Yeah.
East Central Pennsylvania.
East Central, yes, indeed. Reading, over there.
Yeah, in Bloomsburg right now.
Yeah.
Bloomsburg is at, Bloomsburg University.
Sure.
Is right on the Susquehanna where the Interstate 80 crosses.
Yeah, I'll say that beautiful river too.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of a family were you born into, David? Sisters and brothers?
I was born into a family of, my father was Scottish, Campbell, and my mother was Henry, Dutch. And I had a brother and a sister, an older brother and a younger sister, on a farm, a general purpose farm of about 130, 40 acres.
I'll be darned.
10 cows.
So you
pigs,
grew up as a farm boy.
Farm boy.
Learning all the chores and...
No electricity.
How about that?
4 miles to school.
How about that? When were you born?
The 24th of October, 1922.
1922. Well, it's very, very interesting because we're going to get into your story, of course, but we'd like to find out, and for all who will see this interview, people like to know, you went to elementary school there nearby?
Nearby, fortunately, the elementary school was a one-room schoolhouse, 8
Country
grades,
school.
and it was right on my father's property.
Oh, yeah.
They set aside a couple acres, built a schoolhouse on it, and that's where I went to school. The school teacher boarded at our house, so I had an in with the school teacher.
Isn't that something? And high school?
High school was in the village of Orangeville, which was 4 miles, and that was all by foot.
Sure.
Or bicycle.
Yeah,
it was,
right.
Unfortunately, it was downhill all the way to school and uphill all the way home.
All the way home.
So it was just as easy to walk as it was to push that
Right,
bicycle.
I should say. So you traversed those miles in all sorts of weather, and well, that's
Yes.
a great
Yes.
experience. And in the 1920s, things were so different from now, of course. Not only because of communications and transportation, but also because of the economic times, the way they were, and so forth.
Went through that depression.
Oh my goodness, yes, we did
Yes.
that. That was something else. Well, now, in high school, for example, did you have some interests, athletics, clubs, so forth?
Well, it was a vocational high school.
Oh, yeah.
So you had reading, writing, arithmetic, English, and home economics, and then woodsmanship, shop, things of that. So when you graduated, you were prepared to be a farmer or a carpenter. And be able to cook your own meals if you had to.
Yeah, right. Well, that again, very, very forming part of life, of character, and so forth and so on. The high school years for most of us were pretty happy times. How about you?
It was happy because I'm discovered that I wasn't really bred to be a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
So there was always the chores to do before you went to high school, and you walked to high school, and you came home, and there was always chores to do when you got home. And there was sports. You play baseball. Baseball was, all the games were after school was out.
Yes.
And then you walked home after the game was over, or I played soccer, and the same thing. Maybe you would drive away to another school,
Right.
have to drive back, and then walk home. But I enjoyed those,
Right, right.
except that we were so poor that my father couldn't afford to buy me baseball shoes or football or soccer shoes.
Yep.
Fortunately, the coach would loan me shoes, or in the baseball season, I just wore sneakers. you know.
Sure, sure. Didn't have the spikes.
No spikes. No. So those were the kind of conditions we were living in, and you know, everybody else was in the same boat, and
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
didn't think much about it.
Well, then, let's see now. Born in 2218, so your high school class was 1940?
Yes.
Okay, in 1940. And here again, difficult times, the depth of the Depression, and people scrabbling for whatever it would take to keep body and soul and families together and so forth. But at the same time, there we were. It was a time of welding the families together and so forth. And you know, did you have any awareness of World War I?
Yes, because one of my uncles was gassed in World War I. And I will always remember my uncle.
Yes.
He was sick and he died at an early age
Oh,
as a result of that. You know.
Yes. Oh, very, very sad. Well, the thing about that is, of course, you know, after the World War I, the great, so-called the end of the Great War, you know, we all thought that's going to be the end of wars. And it wasn't too long before we were back into it again. 1940 now, you're out of high school, and what did you do then? Did you get a job, or?
No, I stayed on the farm
Stayed on
because
the
the
farm.
farm work continued. But I was a student of geography and history, and I could see the war coming. I used to listen to Edward R. Murrow broadcasting from London, and the chap that was I know his name so well, broadcasting from Berlin.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I could remember the Japanese war in China, and as I told Dennis earlier, the thing that always set in my mind was the Chinese child burning on the streets of Shanghai as a result of the Japanese bombing.
Yes.
And I could see it to this day just like I could see it.
Yes.
Then I knew there was a war coming.
Yes. Well, yeah, and you're bringing that memory up, that very, very famous photograph of the child sitting in the, oh yeah, that was never to be forgotten. And you know, in those days we had things like Life magazine and Look magazine, which were great publications.
They were my outlook from the outside world, basically, on living on the farm, you know.
To the outside world. We all have points in our lives when that we regard as seminal dates, and of course, most everyone who lived in those times, December the 7th, 1941, was never to be forgotten, not only for what it was, but where you were, and where did you hear the news on December the 7th?
That's a funny story.
Good.
Because I was at Langley Field, Virginia, and there was a group of us planning to go to Norfolk, Virginia to see how the Navy lived. And so I had just bought a new trench coat and a sport jacket. And Sunday morning, we were going to catch the early ferry from Newport News over to Norfolk, Virginia, to see the Navy. And kept hearing this thing on the radio about Pearl Harbor and everything. So we said, let's get on can't be true. Let's get on the boat before something happens. we got to Norfolk, Virginia, and the shore patrol was out. All military returned to their...
Oh, my God.
So I had bought a new sport coat and a new trench coat just in time to take it back to the base, turn it in for the war. For the
Okay,
duration.
now, by that time you were in the service.
Yes.
Tell us about what was your...
Well, when I graduated from high school, I spent the summer on the farm with the understanding that the moment I was 18, my father was going to allow me to join the Army Air Corps.
Oh, yeah.
And true enough, on the 24th of October, I was 18, and on the 28th of October, I was a member of the Army Air Corps.
Army Air Corps.
Yeah,
How
at
about
Langley
that?
Field, Virginia.
Well, isn't that something?
And while I had joined the Air Corps with the idea of being a radio operator, radio was sort of fascinating as well as airplanes,
Sure.
I saw those young second lieutenants with the green jackets, the pink trousers, and the silver wings, and the red convertibles driving around, you know. Right. And all of a sudden, my eyes are opened to a whole new...
Oh, my God, a whole new kind
a
of
whole
life.
new, but it was impossible for me just being a enlisted person. But by that time, shortly thereafter, they realized there was going to be a shortage of pilots. And they passed a public law that allowed members of the armed services between the age of 18 and 20 who had a high school education, who could pass a mental and physical exam, and were between the ages of 18 and 20, and promised to sign on for another 5 years after they graduated from flying school, could go to flying school and become a staff sergeant pilot.
Oh, yeah.
So I availed myself of that opportunity.
Good for you.
And how fortunate I was, because I was still in the 22nd Bomb Group, which is the first group to have B-26 airplanes. When December the 7th occurred, probably a week later, the 22nd Bomb Group departed Langley Field and went to Muroc Dry Lake, California, which is now the big base out there. And we started flying anti-sub patrols out of Muroc Dry Lake. On the 7th of January, I got orders to go to flying school. And the 22nd Bomb Group had orders to leave San Francisco for Port Moresby, New Guinea on the 18th of January. So I missed it by 11 days, and that was a very big turning point in my life. Because the ones who got their orders after they went to New Guinea never got to come home.
Yeah, yeah.
So
My goodness, what a
it was a big
what a
affected the rest of my life.
moment of fate.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
So you went on to flying school,
Went on to flying school.
and that was in Southern California?
No, all the way back to Maxwell Field, and then I went through Camden, South Carolina, which was a civilian flying school operated by the military or supervised by the military. And then for the next phase, I went to Bushfield, Augusta, Georgia, which again was a civilian flying school supervised by the military. And then from there, I went to Spence Field, Moultrie, Georgia, which was a military flying school, the advanced flying school. That's where I got my wings.
Right.
And lo and behold, totally unknowns to me, was my poor father and mother had ridden all the way from Orangeville, Pennsylvania, to hot, steamy, muggy Moultrie, Georgia in September to be there for my graduation. Never forget that either.
Isn't that something? Oh, that must have been a very emotional.
It was very moving, yeah.
Oh my goodness. Complete surprise.
Complete surprise.
They didn't tell you we're coming?
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
David, that's a wonderful story. Well, now listen, you're something really special because there aren't a lot of those flying sergeants around.
There's only less than 500 of us left.
Is that right? How many do you think overall were trained to get
There was
that?
approximately somewhere just under 3,500 total.
3,500, which is still a very limited number.
Yes, it was.
Very exclusive
Yeah, very exclusive
organization. Well, that is
We
great.
we band of brothers.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yeah.
Oh, can I imagine what that was like
Yeah.
to have that tie together, and that staff sergeant, those chevrons on your arm, and
It was a lot
everything.
better than that one stripe
Yeah.
PFC.
Oh boy, I'll say so. I should say. So you went right. You got that rank right from your initial
On the
flying.
graduation.
Oh, I see.
He give you a set of wings and a set of sergeant stripes,
How about
staff
that?
sergeant stripes.
Now, there you were, and you're still you're an enlisted man theoretically, of course, but you've had this great training, which many commissioned flyers had the same training.
Exactly. In fact,
Exactly.
we were all interspersed with the
Absolutely.
cadets.
Isn't that something?
Yep.
Well, that's just outstanding, and I just think that people ought to know about that, because that's something you don't hear about
No, you don't.
today. And I was aware of that. Although I did not, I didn't go into the service till December the 8th, 1941. But when you came back, now when you graduated from Moultrie, that's where you got your wings, right? Okay. Then from there, what were your first orders?
To ride the train to Bedford, Lexington, Massachusetts.
Oh boy.
And it was nothing but a tent city and P-40s.
P-40s.
Yeah.
Warhawks.
Warhawk. At that time, it was the Kitty Hawk. And tents, no hot water. And now we're talking 15th of September, 1942. Cool in the evenings in New England.
And you were in Minuteman country.
Yeah. And they gave us a manual for the P-40, and one of the officers, there's only about a half a dozen officers, took me out, showed me the controls. I memorized everything, and he showed me how to start it, and I said, okay, go fly the P-40.
Oh, gee whiz.
And from the AT-6 to the P-40 was a pretty good sized jump.
I should say so.
But I managed to get it off and back down in one piece, and from then on,
How about that?
in a short period of time, I was a good P-40 pilot.
Isn't that wonderful? How many hours did you have in a P-40?
Well, at the time I went overseas, I probably had 150 hours, because there was two groups juggling pilots, and they thought that I was going to fill into an outfit that was going overseas immediately. So I got extra P-40 time, extra P-40 time.
Good.
And then that fell through, and they formed a new group. And we went to Manchester, New Hampshire. And the other group went on its way, and I stayed with the new group until January of 43, when we packed up, lock, stock, and barrel, left all our airplanes, rode the train to Langley Field, Virginia, picked up 75 brand new P-40Fs called the Warhawk, flew them over to Norfolk, Virginia, and you know the Navy always flies their airplanes out and they land on the carrier.
Sure.
We weren't about to land on a carrier, so we taxied 75 P-40s down to the streets of Norfolk to the
my
port
gosh.
with a sailor on each wingtip, riding on the wingtip. 75 of us meandering around the streets, and pulled right up along the side of the aircraft carrier. Crane reached over, picked us up.
Put you
Set
on the
us on the
flat
deck.
top. My goodness, I mean, you have really lived some great history. That must have been pretty sensational, going through the streets of Norfolk.
It was interesting. You do quite a crowd after a while.
Well, I would think so. And what was the wingspan on the P-40? Do you remember?
Only about 37 feet, something
Yeah.
like that.
So your wingtips were hanging over the sidewalks anyway.
Just about, yeah.
Isn't that something? That's a great visual picture that you've painted.
Fortunately, by that time, though, they did away with the staff sergeant pilot rank. On the 5th of December, we were promoted to flight officer, which is equivalent to the warrant officer in the Army.
Yeah, right.
And flight officer in the Air.
Okay.
So they decided they didn't want enlisted pilots continuing to fly combat and be subjected to capture and treatment because they were doing officers' jobs.
Sure.
So they commissioned us flight officers.
I see. Now, as a commissioned flight officer, and you compare it to a warrant officer, and we had warrant officer rank in the Navy as well. Kind of a hard to describe what a warrant officer is.
But the thing about it, you were commissioned, and therefore you were entitled to the things that a normal officer would be entitled to. And by capturing, you were still an officer as opposed to a run-of-the-mill enlisted person.
Well, you brought up a very interesting point, because capture was something that a lot of people don't think about and don't remember. And as a matter of fact, we have an organization here in town of Stalag Luft 3 captives who survived, and they're very special too, of course. But anyway, now, so you got aboard the carrier. Do you remember what carrier it was?
Oh yes, never forget it. There was a USS Ranger.
Oh sure.
CV-4.
CV-4, Carrier Vessel 4. Yes, sir. How about that?
And there were 6 destroyers, a heavy cruiser, and a tanker. And we went across the North Atlantic in January of '43.
Wow, that's a heavy sea too.
And I'll never forget the fact that half the airplanes were on the flight deck, and the other half were in the hangar deck. And every other day we'd run up the engines. And it was our day to run up the engines. My airplane was on the flight deck. And I look out, and there's a destroyer thrown over ash cans. There was a submarine, a suspected submarine in the area. And so it was sort of hard to concentrate on checking your engines and watching what was happening out at sea.
Where's the enemy? So they were throwing those depth charges over.
There were half a dozen depth charges over.
How about that?
Sort of distracted your concentration.
Well, I should say.
But nothing ever happened, so.
You were getting a lot of experiences in a short period of time and see all this. Well, yeah, now January of '43, of course, things were hot and heavy over there. Where were you headed?
We're headed for North Africa. We took off from the Carrier Ranger about 75 miles out to sea and landed at Casablanca Airport, which was in sort of shambles from the invasion. And we had a called pierced steel planking strip. Some people weren't so lucky. They dinged up their airplanes on landing, but I got through it safely, and we sat there for a while. And then...
Now this was what, the 12th?
January, this is the beginning of the 12th Air Force.
Yeah.
And then they had the Kasserine Pass episode, and we were forced to take our airplanes up to relieve the group that lost a lot of airplanes at the Kasserine Pass and turn our airplanes over to them and come back and wait for another arrival from the carrier to bring us our airplanes for combat.
How about that?
Which happened, and then in April, I think it was the 14th of April, I flew my first combat mission.
And where was that?
It was, we were stationed at Montesquieu, Algeria. It was just a dirt strip. And we escorted B-26s. We were on a joint base, just grass and ground with B-26s, and we escorted the B-26 group.
The Marauder.
The Marauder, on an attack against a rail yard or something in Tunisia.
Oh, so you, I see.
And the
interesting... You hadn't gotten over Sicily yet.
No.
Oh my gosh, you were a pioneer.
Yeah.
My goodness sakes. Well,
and we escorted primarily, we would have strafing missions But generally our duty was escort, B-26s, B-25s, and so forth. And we escorted bombers to Sardinia, which is across the Mediterranean, and we tried to capture the island of Pantelleria by ourselves. We offered them a chance to surrender to the 325th Fighter Group, which I was a member of, but it didn't come about that way. We gave them a chance to surrender on their own, but they didn't. Eventually they did, of course. But
you gave them a bad time up till that point.
Yeah. And that's where I shot down my first German airplane, was on a trip to Pantelleria.
No kidding. Now, what kind of aircraft?
It was a Messerschmitt 109.
109. How about that?
And see, I was still 19, 20. By then I'm 20, I guess.
Good heavens.
And I won't forget that in the context
No,
that I ruined my machine guns.
Tell us about that, yeah.
Well, I got him, he tried to fight with me, and that was our only advantage with the P-40 was its tight turn. And if the Messerschmitts tried to fight with you, you could outturn them. They had the advantage of speed, altitude, and that thing. So he decided that he wanted to fight, and I wanted to fight, and a little over anxious, I started shooting. I saw the tracers weren't getting to him, so I tightened up my turn, and then I saw the tracers hitting, and I saw the pieces coming off, and so I just kept the trigger down, and eventually he bailed out, and another pilot saw it happen, so I got confirmation. We didn't have wing cameras in those days that worked.
Of course not.
Well, it had to be confirmed, and I discovered after I got back, the crew chief, our armament chief says, "What the hell did you do?" All the guns were drooping.
No kidding.
They overheated them.
Oh, they
holding them.
Is that so?
Shooting too long, you
Oh
know.
my gosh.
So I had to replace 4 guns.
What would your normal burst of firing be?
50 rounds out of each gun. You know.
These were 50 caliber.
50 caliber, yeah. We took 2 guns out. Normally it had 6 guns. We took 2 guns out to make it even more maneuverable, you know.
Now, were these nose guns or were these wing guns? These were wing guns.
Yeah.
How about that? Gosh. Well, we've got a Warhawk out at our Warbird
Yeah,
Museum.
I saw it. I was out there a week or so ago.
And we got the FW-190 out there too. Oh, that's just fascinating. How many were in your squadron?
Well, that was another interesting thing. Out of my first, there was 25 pilots.
25.
And 11 of them were sergeant pilots when we started out, and then we were 11 flight officers.
Became flight officers. How about that? So 25, and did that mean 1 plane for each man?
Yes.
And so that was the complement of the squadron.
Actually, well, you had 27 because you have the commander who doesn't count, and then there's the deputy commander or the operations officer, and over and above that you had the 25 pilots. 25
now, you know, that it's interesting because you're just a golden treasure here of wonderful information and stories. And for example, how did they repair the planes? Did you have parts? You know, did you have to have parts to replace engines and that sort of thing in those planes?
Yes, you had to have a support outfit. Most of it was the mechanics, the knowledge and the ingenuity of
creative.
Creative, yes, indeed, yeah. And
good old Yankee ingenuity.
Yeah, a lot of that went on.
Oh
I tell
my
you.
golly, yes! Isn't that something?
Yeah.
But you had armorers and you had.
We had armorers and we had bomb experts and you had the communication experts and you had the basic mechanic.
Now, did you carry any light bombs on those?
Oh yeah, we carried. We dropped 1,000-pound bombs and we dropped 500-pound bombs.
From a P-40?
Yeah,
Is that so? That's very interesting, I should say. So, boy, you were loaded for bear when you took off. Now, as the war progressed, you were against the Africa Corps there in North Africa. And the Italians as well?
And the
Were
Italians as well,
there
yeah.
too? Yeah. So as you were pushing Rommel back, or stopping him anyway, of course he was trying to get to Cairo. When were you changed to go, say, over after Pantelleria, which is a small island between Sicily and the mainland? Then did you have targets on Sicily itself, on the big island?
Yes. See, we were working on Pantelleria after the Axis surrendered in North Africa. And that was an interesting thing because I went to the victory parade in Tunis. Now, Tunis was the first real major city Allies had captured in World War II.
Right.
And I flew the wing of the group commander. The group commander chose me to be his wingmate.
Wow.
And that meant I'm protecting the group
That's a
commander.
great honor, too.
So he managed to get permission to go and see the occupation forces celebrate the victory parade in Tunis. And I flew with him, and we went together. And that was the first time an occupation force had occupied a major city. And that was very interesting to watch the 8th Army and the American Army parade through the streets of downtown.
So you landed in Tunis.
Just outside of Tunis.
Just outside, and
at a
so
French base.
And then you had, what, a Jeep to take you into town or something, or what?
We requisitioned a Jeep from the French Air Force, and they said, yes, you can have it as long as you fill it up with gas. So we drove into Tunis, saw the show, came back out, went down to where our airplane was, filled it up with filled the Jeep up with 100-octane gasoline, aviation gasoline, turned it back to the French, full tank of gas.
You fulfilled your agreement.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's a great story. Well, the French, of course, poor French by that time, they didn't know whether to
they had
what or go
free
blind.
American airplanes, so
Oh, golly. Okay, now, flying, then you were flying out of, what?
After the fall, we moved to just outside of Bizerti, which is
Okay.
in Tunisia.
Dirty Gertie from Bizerti.
Yeah, and then you could watch the residual Germans trying to bomb the shipping that was being collected in Bizerti for the Sicilian invasion. So we get to see some nice fireworks at night.
Oh, yeah.
But it was also only about 20 miles from the Mediterranean. It was a great place to go to bathe and enjoy the beaches of the Mediterranean.
Yes.
But then we started our daily missions, primarily strafing or escorting bombers to Sicily in preparation for the invasion of Sicily. And we participated in the actual invasion by escorting bombers, and one of our pilots got shot down and had to bail out at sea, and coincidentally enough, his cousin picked him up in one of the ships that were going to the invasion of Sicily.
For heaven's sake, what a story. Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Did you lose some pilots?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Pretty high rate of mortality?
No, but it's unforgettable.
Oh, yeah.
Especially.
One is too many.
I'll never forget the one, and it shall remain nameless, but it was the first pilot that we actually lost. It was him begging for help. And that always stay with me, too.
Yes.
There's somebody being shot down and begging for help, and there's nothing anybody can do about it.
He went in. Went into the sea?
Went into the ground.
Went into the ground. Oh, my goodness. Oh, goodness. Yeah, those things stay with you forever. So then, what was the next move then after your strafing Sicily and so forth?
Well, we kept on constant bombardment on Sardinia.
Oh, yeah, Big Island.
Yeah, the Big Island. And again, we were escorting bombers, or we would go on fighter sweeps to try to draw the residual German Air Force into combat. And I never did get to have another go at a 109. I did shoot down a Messerschmitt called a 323. It was originally a glider that they attached six small engines to, so that they could use it for resupply and not rely on inertia alone to get someplace, you know. And it was interesting because it was full of gasoline and it was sneaking in on the ground, and there were only about 5 rounds from each gun, and it just blew up.
Just took it out.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there were 4 of us, and we caught 4 airplanes doing that.
Really?
Yeah. And it made 4 big fires in a short order.
Yeah. Now, what kind of credit did you get for that?
Well, that was my second airplane.
That was your second.
There were 4 different airplanes,
I see.
and 4 different ones of us. The group commander again.
Yeah.
He got his, I got mine, and my wingman and the other wingman got
Oh, I
each
see.
got one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's something. So now you had
Had
2.
two,
You were
yeah.
on your way to being an ace.
And the Sicilian campaign was successfully completed, and by now, word was that we're going to get a new airplane. We were going to get rid of the P-40, and I had done 61 missions.
61.
And anybody that had more than 50 missions, the unit was going to go off for operations while they got a new airplane and got accustomed to it and got it fixed up and everything. You could go home if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
I chose to go home.
Mm-hmm.
On the way home, I was told that I had been promoted, battlefield commissioned to 2nd lieutenant.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up in Norfolk, Virginia on my 21st birthday.
How about that? And you were a shave tail.
And I was a 2nd lieutenant.
Oh boy.
With a DFC and 11 air medals.
How about 11 air medals? And that DFC, that is such an important medal. I read someplace where that's the 8th most important one.
Used to be more than that, but
Yeah.
they lowered it down and added
I know,
more.
they skewered some others in there. But anyway, what did it take to get an air medal? What was the?
If you live through 10 missions,
Okay.
you got an air medal.
10
and
missions.
for every 5 missions thereafter.
So you wound up with 14 air medals?
No, 11.
11, I'm sorry, 11 air medals. Good heavens. My goodness, that's just tremendous, David. Did you ever get wounded?
No.
Never got a scratch?
I personally never got a scratch. My airplane got a 20 millimeter through the wingtip. That the cannon shell head went through, and it was on the other side of the wing before it exploded, so all it did was make a hole. And then the bottom of the wing had a lot of little holes.
Shrapnel scratches and so forth.
That was a little exciting. And
I should say.
my last mission, the elevator trim tab broke out of the concussion of a 88 millimeter flak.
Wow.
And I was over Sardinia at the time, and I had 100 miles or so of Mediterranean to cross. And the elevator just kept going like that.
Right.
And trim tab didn't work.
No. Ineffective.
And I didn't know what had happened. And finally, my wingman took a close look, and he says, "It looks like your trim has been broken because it's fluttering in the breeze." So I could control it at 200, so we cruised 200 miles an hour back across the Mediterranean.
Wow.
And landed, and that was my last mission.
Oh, it was. I'll be darned. Now, when was this? This was 43?
This is the end of September, 43.
September of 43. Now, by this time, the Anzio landings in Salerno,
Had not taken place yet.
they hadn't taken place yet. Okay.
They were just mopping up the Sicilian.
I see. Right. The Sicilian campaign, that was a pretty intense time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
I mean, we had troops on the ground, and you guys in
That
the air.
rugged terrain.
Terrible terrain.
Yeah.
Mountainous.
Dry mountain.
Oh my goodness sakes. Did you have any interaction at all with civilians, Italian civilians on the ground or anything like that?
Tunis we did.
In Tunis?
In Tunis. Met a nice Jewish, there's a lot of Jewish families in Tunis.
Nice relationships.
Yeah, and had a nice relationship with some of the families there.
They were friendly
Yeah,
and welcoming.
very friendly, yeah.
Glad to see those Yanks come
Yeah,
aboard,
yeah.
I should say. Well, that's interesting because there's a man that lives in Hyde Park. His name is Earl Slanker, who's a B-26 pilot in the ETO. And maybe we can get together sometime and talk. But anyway, now, you're back in the States. You're now a second lieutenant. What was the next move?
After a little bit of P-47 training at Richmond, Virginia, I was transferred to a beauty spot, of all beauty spots, a Wendover, Dry Lake, Utah. Excuse me. Before that, we went to Pocatello, Idaho.
Okay.
And set up a P-47 training unit, overseas training unit, OTU. And that collapsed fairly quickly, and we all moved to Wendover, Utah. And if you've never been to Wendover, Utah, I don't recommend you go there.
I know where
it's on the
is.
borderline between Utah and Nevada.
Yeah.
And there was nothing there but
Nothing.
salt and white salt. And
Of course,
dead,
you had a great landing area there.
great landing area.
Yeah. Solid.
And the interesting there, of course, was a state line hotel.
Okay.
Because Utah is dry and Nevada
Oh, my
is wet.
goodness, yes.
And the state line ran right through the middle of the hotel. And the bar was in Nevada. And reception was in Utah. And the line was painted right across the floor, you know.
Oh,
Gambling, booze, anything went on the Nevada side, and
on the
everything
other-
was pure and Mormon.
pure Mormon. Oh my goodness, isn't that
that
something?
was interesting. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you know, what's amazing, David, is that you were so young and you were having all these incredible experiences. A farm boy from Pennsylvania. Oh, by the way, when you got back, were you able to let your parents know you were coming?
Oh yeah, and not coming home, not until I got back.
No, I mean, but I was
Yeah, oh, yeah.
visualizing there, standing on the dock waiting for you or something.
I went home because of him. But that's another interesting story.
Yeah,
the
tell
fact
us
that
how-
my group commander, who I protected during his missions, a big B-26 bomb wing killed the wing commander and the group commander, and they told my fighter group commander, I want you to take over their place. He says, what if I refuse? Well, you can't refuse. But you can go back to the States for a couple of weeks, make up your mind, but that's where you're going.
Think about it.
And God bless him, he's still alive today, and we still correspond. He's a retired Major General.
Isn't
He
that?
went to my home and told my parents how well I was doing,
Wasn't that?
and then came back and served his tour as a B-26 wing commander.
What a guy.
It was.
Oh,
Never
true,
forgot that.
loyal friend. Oh, that's
Yeah.
marvelous. Is he still alive?
He's still alive. He's 95 years old, living in Alexandria, Virginia.
Isn't that?
We talk about once every 6 weeks.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the meantime, of course, unbeknownst to you, when I was still in the States before I went over, I met a girl from Amherst, New Hampshire.
Aha.
I was flying alert out of protecting East Boston with P-40s.
He's lost.
And you served a week down there, and then you took the bus back to the base in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I happened to get on the bus, and while I was riding on the bus, this good-looking girl got on, and I got up enough nerve to sit with her. and she became my wife. After she was only 15 at the time. Daddy made her wait. Then we waited until she was 18, and she was 18.
And in the meantime, you had been overseas?
I've been overseas.
I can imagine.
And went to, from Wendover, Utah, we went to Abilene, Texas. I went to Abilene, Texas, and that's where I was stationed when I eventually came home, married her, and took her back to Abilene, Texas.
Oh, so she
At
became
Abilene,
an
Texas, we taught Brazilian pilots, American pilots, Turkish pilots, and Mexican pilots.
Really? Did you ever go back overseas again?
Not during the war.
Not during the war.
No.
So you were back and you were an
I was
instructor?
training pilot, yeah, instructor.
Yeah. Oh, that is great. Well,
It was interesting, the Turkish pilots and the Mexican pilots, it was interesting.
I'll bet so.
I made a lot of friends in the Turkish Air Force.
Isn't that something? Yeah. We've always had a good relationship with Turkey.
With the Turkish military, yeah.
Yeah, with the Turkish military.
Yeah.
That's interesting, yeah. So you got in all those desert towns.
Yeah.
Holy cow, that's really something.
Yeah, I can never forget that in Texas. It was so hot in that P-47, I carried a thermometer when it was 137 degrees in the cockpit.
Wow.
Doing ground support practice, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, you had your flight suit on.
I had a flight suit on and that heat of that bloody great engine out in front of me.
Yeah, and all those wires around you and everything else. My goodness. Well, that is, what a story, David. What a great, great story. Now, you remained in the Air Force. It became from the Air Corps to the Air Force. And what about your post-war service?
Well, after the war ended, I went to Army Public Relations School at Carlisle Barracks.
Okay.
And
Back in your home state.
back in my own state. And while I was there, I got word from the Adjutant General that I'd been accepted as a regular officer, second lieutenant in the
Okay.
U.S. Army Air Force. Air Force, yeah. U.S. Army Air Force. So that was a very, I had applied for it. My general friend was supporting me, and here it all came true again. I'm appointed as a second lieutenant in the Army Air Force.
Right, right.
From there, I went to Japan, the occupation. In January of 1946. Spent 3 years in Japan as an operations planner.
And your wife was
My
able
wife
to come
came
over with you?
in July of 46
How
with
wonderful.
a small child.
Oh, wonderful.
And that was an interesting assignment. Made a lot of nice occupation member friends from the British and the Australians and the New Zealanders.
Right, right.
And I flew P-51s as a sideline. And then fortunately I got to fly the P-80 as a sideline because we got the 49th Fighter Group, which was in northern Japan, got P-80s, the first ones in the Pacific. And as an operations officer, I had to fly the airplanes that the units flew.
You had to test everything
I got
out.
to fly the P-80.
Now, what was your rank by this time?
I was a first lieutenant.
First lieutenant. Silver bars.
Silver bar, and it only cost me $75 to fly the P-80 because you had to buy the bar.
Oh, you
all
had to
night long, the day you flew. The day you soloed the P-80. Of course, there was no dual ship, so when you got in and got it back down, you had soloed, of course.
Sure. Was that a challenging aircraft? That P-80?
It was a lot more anticipatory challenges rather than actual.
I see. Once you got into it, you knew what to do. You
knew
could
what to
handle
do.
it very well.
And you were born that it was a floater because it was very clean. And once you got accustomed to the floating and anticipated in advance so that you could be prepared for it, it was all right.
Good, good, good.
It was quite a change to go on from the conventional engine speeds, though, to the speeds that would do.
I should say, what was the landing
you're
speed?
cruising around maybe 200, 250, and you're setting up there without any external fuel, you know, and you're doing 400, 450 or something like that, you know.
Oh boy.
The landing speeds weren't that great. They were probably 95 miles an hour on touchdown, something like that.
My
But
goodness.
it was hard to kill off the speed. You just
right.
kept floating and floating.
Yeah, that floating, that took a little bit of handling. Well, your time in Japan, 3 years. That's did you get all over the islands? You get up to Hokkaido?
Oh, yes.
Down
Yes,
to Kyushu
we
and so
flew
forth?
anti-submarine, anti-Russian
Yeah.
all around Wakanai, which is, and the Kurils and Sakhalin Island, which was occupied by the Russians.
Yeah.
And we'd fly anti-patrol just to see what they were doing or see that they weren't doing any encroaching from the sea. And of course, the sea was frozen over in the wintertime. I was always interested in a single-engine Mustang flying around over a frozen sea. You know, if anything happened, it's going to be awfully cold down there.
I'll say. Pretty devastating to have to land on that kind of a surface, too.
Yes. And the other interesting thing about that was I got to, every year there was a mass flyover of Tokyo by all the occupation air forces. And I planned the missions.
Oh, you did?
So you were going from an L5 type airplane to a jet type airplane with the B-29 and the B-26s and cargo airplanes all interspersed.
Oh, my.
And I can remember putting 500 airplanes over Tokyo.
You were a real operational,
And that was a very challenging
I should say,
job,
so.
and it always seemed to work out okay.
Well, they certainly recognized your ability and depended on you greatly for that sort of thing. Did you ever see MacArthur?
Yes, only to the tune to stand out front and watch him
Go by or something.
come out.
Oh, I
the
see.
Jet Old headquarters building.
Okay.
And the joke was that he was late coming out, well, the crowd wasn't big enough. So
Waiting for that photo op. Isn't that something? Yeah.
I don't know whether that's true or not, but that
Well,
was a standing joke. And
There are a lot of stories like that about him, you know, and of course that famous photo of his wading ashore in the Philippines, that was the third try. When they finally decided.
Got it right.
He said, now take the picture, we got it right. Well, now, did you get down into the South Pacific? Did you get over to Australia or New Zealand? Or
no, I would always love to go there because I made
Yeah.
a lot of Australian and New Zealand friends.
Yes. Yeah, the Anzacs were great
Yeah.
people, weren't they?
Yeah.
Great people.
I did get to see an Anzac, a New Zealander, because when I was with the Royal Air Force, he was my wing commander.
Oh.
Was what is it, the George Cross?
Oh, yeah.
He was in the
Big time.
bombing of the dam busters.
Oh, yeah. In Germany.
You know,
oh,
on the
my
George.
gosh. Oh.
The Victoria Cross, that's it.
Victoria
The
Cross.
Victoria
Well, that's the
Cross.
top one.
Yeah, it's the top one.
Victoria Cross, yeah, that's the equivalent of our
Congressional
Medal of
Medal,
Honor.
yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, now, this is so interesting, and I want to talk with you after we're through here then did you serve in the Korean War as well?
I got to come home before the Korean War, and I spent the Korean War training pilots to go to the Korean War.
Oh, well, that was lucky too.
Yeah.
Korean
Came home
War
and
was-
went to Williams Air Force Base, Arizona,
Arizona. Williams,
where
Arizona.
we'd take them initially in the T-6 and then put them in the P-80.
Sure.
And then we got the T-28, which was the tricycle landing gear, increased version of the old T-6, and put them in the T-30, in the P-80. We trained Norwegian, Danish, Dutch, Belgian, French, and Italian, as well as American pilots, NATO pilots,
NATO, yeah.
and American pilots.
Well, that
All came through Williams Air Force Base.
Oh my goodness sakes! So you had tremendous international connections with all these interesting people. Got we're coming close to our time here, David, and I want to get as much in as possible. The period after the Korean War, you were still in the States. Were you ever back overseas again after that?
Well, from there I went to an exchange assignment with the Royal Air Force, and I spent 3 years with the Royal Air Force first as a basic instructor and then as the chief flying instructor for RAF Oakington was where I was stationed. And then another overseas assignment was I became the senior air attaché to Pakistan. So I spent 3 years in Pakistan too.
My goodness sakes. Islamabad.
No, Karachi. Islamabad.
Western.
It hadn't been
separated yet.
I was the last one in Karachi because they were still building the embassy, and that had it completed before I had departed. So my replacement went to Islamabad.
I see. Now, what year was that? Do you remember?
1964, 65, and 66.
65. So now...
we only had 3 wars in that period of time between India and Pakistan.
Goodness sakes. Well, there's a war going on somewhere all the time, everywhere. Now, 65, so now you've already had 25 years in the Air Force. My goodness sakes. How much farther did you go?
Until 1970.
70?
Yeah. Retired.
So you wound up with
30 years.
30 years. That is absolutely amazing. David, that's what a great story. Now, how many, you had a family?
Yes, I have a wife and 2 girls.
2 girls, 2 daughters?
2 daughters, yeah.
And they're the ones that live here, do they?
One daughter lives here with 2 of my grandchildren and 3 of my great-grandchildren.
Oh.
I have another grandson and great-grandson in Washington, D.C.
I see.
And then I have another daughter in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's a long way away.
Yeah. She's coming to visit me at the end of this week.
Oh, how exciting that'll be. Oh, that's just wonderful. Well, so 1970 came and what happened? What rank were you by this time?
I was a lieutenant colonel.
Lieutenant colonel?
Yeah.
Okay, you got the silver leaf.
Yeah.
And
from there I retired, went back to the University of Maryland for a year to get teaching credentials, and then I became a school teacher in New Hampshire and then a principal in New Hampshire school system.
Oh, my golly. What was
and I went and got a master's degree.
Wonderful. Good for you. Well, was it history? Was that your main forte?
Yeah, social studies.
Social
science.
Yeah, that's what they call them now. Used to be Western Civ and all that sort of thing. You know? Well, you have had a most astounding career. I'm telling you, this is just, it's been a great thrill for me and to have lived through that period as well and remember all these different things that you talked about. Of course, I was in the Navy for 4 years, but your contribution to our nation, David, is just we can't even describe it adequately because your devotion, number one, your devotion to your family, of course, and then your nation, and to your service, and your dedication to everything that you did. And of course, it's obvious that you had nothing in mind but being the very best.
That's right.
And you certainly show that is what came to be. And what do you think about things today? Where do we start, huh? I know.
The world's going to hell in a handbasket. That's the
really
summation of it. You know, first of all, it had its drawbacks and its being very provoking at times, but I had a wonderful time serving our country. I enjoyed it, and sort of pride myself that I didn't let my future, what I might do in the future, interfere with what I was doing on a daily basis.
Yes.
Some people spend their time in the service working on what they're going to do afterwards. I could never go that way.
No.
But right now, I'm glad I'm not a school teacher or a school principal, because
Yes.
I'd been crucified
I know.
and hung out to dry for some of the things they did as a principal if they
Sure.
were
Of
doing
course.
nowadays.
Oh, I know, it is.
And
If you dwell on it, it can break your heart. So it's better not to. You got to keep moving ahead.
yeah,
Well, honestly, we've come to the end of our period here, David, and I just can't tell you how much this has meant to me personally. And I know that your family is going to love seeing you on this DVD. And as Dennis said,
I hope they will.
well, of course they will. They'll be so proud. And I'm sure you have memorabilia and photo albums and all that sort of thing. And
Too much of it, I think.
yeah, I know, we get burdened down with that, don't we? Well, anyway, we're just so proud to make your acquaintance. We thank you. Of course, you know, people say, well, thank you for your service. Sometimes it sounds a little empty, but that comes from the heart here, as you can well imagine. And we're blessed to know you, and we're glad you're in Cincinnati.
Right. Thank you.
And we
hope I contributed something.
look forward to getting together with you
Okay.
again. Thank you so much.